Back with part 2. I just actually looked at the time of the last video and see we're at an hour. I'm going to try to go through this quickly. It might not happen. I'll see where we are at the end of this lecture, and what I might have you do is start your in-class activity and then continue it tomorrow, Tuesday, when you're back in class. All right, so let me pull up my screens. All right, so the history of epidemiology. All right, so epidemiology is sort of considered to have started in the period of what we call classical antiquity, so before 500 AD. So up until this point, there had always been all these like supernatural explanations of disease. You got disease because you're cursed. You got disease because you didn't pray to something to do with the gods or anyhow. So not scientific but supernatural explanations of disease. And then in 400 BC, Hippocrates suggested, so the famous Greek philosopher suggested that environmental factors such as air, water, and food were causes of disease outbreaks. And he authored a pretty historically important book called On Airs, Waters, and Places. And what he did was interesting. He didn't delineate specific causes, but he more generally just implicated environmental factors. He said, I think that dirty air, dirty water, dirty food are what causing disease, not that it was these supernatural things that caused disease, but it was actually things that we could change. So he didn't know, he lacked knowledge on specific agents of cause and disease. And in this respect, the early epidemiology shares sort of with contemporary what's going on now in epidemiology, and that we frequently lack complete knowledge of the specific agents of disease, particularly those like associated with chronic disease. We for the most part understand like things like obesity and diabetes, but we haven't totally figured out how to they're very complicated. We don't know specifically what's causing all these things, but we have ideas, like really good models of what we think could be the issue. Oops, going the wrong way. All right, so then we sort of go into the Middle Ages. So this is like 500 to 1450. And, I think a pretty important period of time is the Black Death, which is from 1346 to 1352. And this claimed up to 1/3 of the population of Europe, and it was thought to be an epidemic of the bubonic plague. It's not for certain, but that's what historians and like epidemiological historians think it was. And bubonic plague is a bacterial disease called Yersinia pestis, and it's characterized generally by really painful swelling of the lymph nodes in the groin and elsewhere in the body. And untreated, it kills up to 60%. And the bites of fleas are thought to transmit the plague, and other symptoms might include fever and appearance of black splotches on the skin. There's a pretty good picture in your book if you're really interested. Anyhow, so that's sort of epidemiology in the Middle Ages. Then we have the Renaissance, which is 1200 to 1699. So Paracelsus is the founder of the field of toxicology, toxicology being the discipline that examines the toxic effect of chemicals. And he sort of, and this is, he identified one very important concept that we still use today, which is the dose-response relationship. So specifically, the observation that the effects of poisons are related to the strength of the dose. That should say dose, not does. So anything is harmful in a certain amount, right? If you drink enough water, it could kill you. If you drank it in serious excess. So he came up with this idea that there's a dose response in toxicology. So next we have John Grant, and the reason he's famous is because he was just the first to employ quantitative methods to organize mortality and birth data. So he's kind of considered the Columbus of statistics. So moving on, Into the 18th century, we've got Sir Percival Pott. He was a London surgeon, and he was the first person to describe an environmental cause of disease and suggest a prevention measure. So what he noticed, he was just a very astute man and noticed that chimney sweeps were prone to scrotal cancer as a result of their contact with soot. And he recommended in his intervention here, he said, I think what needs to happen is that these chimney sweeps need to take a bath once a week, and then scrotal cancer rates will decline. And what's kind of cool here is at this point we don't know anything about the biology of cancer, right? And sort of why the chimney soot might cause scrotal cancer, but he at least knew that something was going on, and he came up with the idea that you should bathe. All right, so Edward Jenner. So Edward Jenner developed a smallpox vaccination, and what he found was that he saw that dairy maids who were infected with cowpox were immune to smallpox. So he did something that's would be considered very controversial now. He created a vaccine using material from an active case of cowpox from a milkmaid, and then he took that active case of cowpox and the active vaccination, and he gave it to an 8-year-old boy, and then he later exposed that boy to smallpox to see if he would get ill. Fortunately, the boy didn't get ill, and then Jenner went on to vaccinate all sorts of other children, including his own son, and then the vaccination went on to be adopted more widely. Moving on into the 1800s, at this point we have no connection between microorganisms and disease. So basically, epidemiology, so the way people think disease is transmitted is sort of this miasmatic theory, which is just that disease is transmitted by like miasma or like low-hanging clouds. People thought cholera and malaria were occurring because of clouds, and this idea that there was sort of like miasms that clung low to earth. So John Snow is who we consider the father of modern day epidemiology, and he published sort of 2 really seminal studies. And I will ask you a quiz question about John Snow. Not about Game of Thrones John Snow, about the father of modern epidemiology, John Snow. All right, so in 1854, there's this big cholera epidemic going on in London. And Snow suspects that water was the source of the infection. And he decides to go out and look for a relationship between the pumps and the cases of cholera. Now remember, this is sort of radical because at this point in time, there's this miasmatic theory of disease, just that like cholera is happening because of the clouds or because of low-hanging miasms. So he develops something we now today refer to as a spot map, which is what you're seeing. And he doesn't do anything, by today's standards, is very radical, but at that point in time, it was. He just maps where people with cholera live and work, and then he maps the location of the pumps. All right, so when we look at this, what do you see? All right, you see we've got this pump B over here. There's a few cases, pump maybe X over here by Regent Street, nothing. Pump C, there's not really anything. This pump down in the lower right, nothing. But pump A, the pump on Broad Street, there's all these cases, right? So John Snow says, it seems like something's going on with pump A. And then what he also notices, right, is there's this there's these 2 housing blocks where there's no cases, and he thinks that's weird. So it takes a lot of sort of pushing and prodding, but he convinces the city to let him take the water pump off this handle to see if it sort of helps to stop the outbreak, and it does. And then what he also does is he goes over to these two blocks where there's no cases, and he just starts talking to them to figure out what's going on. And what he finds in these two blocks is that there's actually a brewery here. And everyone who's living in this brewery, that lives in these 2 blocks, gets their water and drinks from the brewery, which has a deep, deep well. So these people weren't actually going to the pump. All right, you guys, I got to take 2 seconds to open my lecture notes because I accidentally closed it. All right, still opening. Still opening. Sorry guys, the way I'm doing this is I'm recording on my computer screen and I have my notes open on my phone and I accidentally closed it. All right, slide Jon Snow. All right, okay, so the mapping study results I think are basically what I just talked through with you, but Snow concludes that the Broad Street pump, A, is the most likely source of infection. He removes the handle of the water pump and the cholera epidemic ends. Hooray, Jon Snow. All right, and then he also notes that there's that 2-block area east of the Broad Street pump and it's location of a brewery with a deep well. So the second study that he does is the water company study. So Lambeth Company and Southwark and Vauxhall Company are 2 water companies that service the entire area with the highest death rates. So basically these areas in the map, we've got 2 water companies in there. Now, both companies obtain their water from the Thames River. Southwark gets their water downstream of London, but to avoid sewage contamination, Lambeth Company actually gets the water upstream of London. And Snow suspects that the water downstream of the Thames is actually the source of the contamination because of the sewage. And so he just goes out and sort of counts cases based on which water supply they're using. So now instead of mapping who lives where and where they get and the water, he's counting cases based on the water supply of the individual house. That's what this second column here is showing you. All right, so the water from downstream of London is Southwark and Vauxhall. And the population for the 1851 census in London is 98,000. Number of deaths from cholera was 419. The death rate per 1,000 population is 4.2. The water from upstream of London, this is the Lambeth Company. The population is 154. We've got 80 deaths to give you a cholera death rate of 0.5. So if we compare these 0.5 versus 4.2, yeah, his hypothesis here that getting water downstream of London from the area that could be contaminated by sewage is pretty correct. And again, remember, at this point in time, we don't have the microorganism theory, so he doesn't know yet about cholera vibrio and the bacterias. So he just demonstrates that there's a higher death rate from cholera in households served by Southwark and Vauxhall Company. This is the one that's downstream. And it's sort of, so why is he important? For a couple reasons. Snow develops a testable hypothesis, right? He thinks one, there's a relationship between cases and water pumps. That's in our spot map. And he also thinks that there's a relationship between a water company and who gets ill. And then he tests his hypothesis with a rigorously designed study. So he develops the spot map, and he counts the cases by where they get which water company they use. And for this reason, he's considered the father of modern day epidemiology. So Jon Snow develops a testable hypothesis and tests his hypothesis. And then the other thing that's really pretty amazing is that he has no knowledge of microorganisms, but he demonstrates that water could serve as a vehicle for transmitting cholera. And that this type of epidemiologic information could be used to prompt public health action. All right, so continuing through the 1800s, there's a couple other old dead people that are important. William Farr is important for coming up with a sophisticated way of codifying medical conditions and using census data to study mortality. Robert Koch verifies that the human disease, so this is when we discover microorganisms and come up with these Koch's postulates. He verifies that humans' disease was caused by living organisms. He isolates bacteria that causes anthrax, isolates bacteria that causes cholera and tuberculosis. And his postulates are that the organism must be observed in every case. The organism must be isolated and grown in pure culture. And the pure culture must reproduce the disease when inoculated in an animal, and the organism must be observed in and recovered from the experimental animal. So Koch's postulates are used to demonstrate an association between a microorganisms and a disease. We can't really use these anymore today because they really only work with infectious diseases, and they don't even work with all infectious diseases. They work with some infectious diseases. For instance, you couldn't prove that there was an organism in every case. If you were trying to find the cause of heart disease and you were looking for an organism, you'd be out of luck, right? Heart disease is caused because of a number of different things and not a microorganism. So Koch's postulates work okay for infectious diseases. They don't work at all for chronic diseases. All right, so moving on to epidemiology in the 19th and 20th centuries. In the mid and late 1800s, so up until this point, epidemiology largely focused on infectious diseases. In the 1930s and 1940s, epidemiologists sort of expand to non-infectious diseases. So one of the most important ones is that they establish the relationship between smoking and lung cancer, and then they start to try to understand the causes of cardiovascular disease. In the 60s and 70s, we eradicate smallpox. In the 80s, epidemiology sort of starts to extend over to the study of injuries and violence. However, new infectious agents sort of start to emerge. This is like the Ebola virus in the mid 70s, HIV in 1981. So there was sort of this sense at the beginning of in the early 1900s that we didn't have to worry about infectious diseases anymore, that these were all going to go away. We know now that that's not true. But there was this idea out there that infectious diseases were going to be a thing of the past. And in the 90s, epidemiologists start to begin to consider the spread of disease through bioterrorism. This, of course, becomes important especially important in the United States around 2001 when the World Trade Center attack, when 9/11 happens. All right, so when we talk about transitions, there's two to keep in mind. So the epidemiologic transition is the shift in examination of morbidity and mortality caused by primarily infectious agents to causes associated with chronic and degenerative diseases. And as society becomes more developed, this is sort of a shift that it will undergo, right? You'll be able to eradicate a lot of infectious agents, but then what's happening, because people are living longer, is you're going to get all these diseases that are associated with aging. So the degenerative and chronic diseases. The other transition you'll hear talked about a lot is the demographic transition. So high birth rates and death rates observed in agrarian societies will transition to lower birth rates and death rates observed in developed countries. So when you're sort of making the transition from a developing to a developed country, you go through what's referred to as the country will go through what's referred to as a demographic transition. All right, so for the last part, the last thing I'm going to do with you guys really quickly is to run through the anatomy of a study. Now, some of you might not need this. I found when I taught the College Now course last summer, that this was the first time a lot of students were being exposed to scientific literature. So really briefly, this is what you're going to look for when you're reading a study, and you're going to be reading studies all semester long. So I think at first it's going to be hard. You're going to be like, what? The writing is technical. It's maybe not as intuitive as things you're used to reading, like reading a textbook, but maybe even worse. But eventually, I promise it will become easier, even by the end of the week. You guys will have the hang of it. All right, so the standard format of a study. You're going to see the abstract, and this is a quick overview. What was done, what was found, why it matters. And the abstract's nice because it gives you an idea if you should actually even go on to read the full article. The introduction is sort of what we know about the topic, what we don't know about the topic, and the objective of the study. The methods is what they did. Results, what they found. Discussion is why it matters, how it should be applied to the, how it should be interpreted, what they think their results mean. All right, so the journal of publication you should be careful about, right? So there's a lot of journals out there that publish really garbage research. For the most part, I'm not going to be picky about what journals you're publishing from. If I see you're pulling articles for your midterm from journals that are like really, really low quality, I might ask you to get different ones. Which is why you're going to be submitting sort of an early lit review to me so that I can see what you're reading. But again, you don't have to worry about this yet. This now. There'll be more on the midterm when I am back in class with you at the beginning of week 2. So in the abstract, you're also going to see the authors. The lead first author is usually the principal investigator or department head or the department head will also be the last author. And the abstract is just a quick overview of the study. Right, and then there's just some notes that it's best to avoid only looking at the abstract. The reason why is that abstracts have strict word limits. They don't tell the whole story. And skimming articles for key points is a skill worth learning. All right, so the introduction is going to be your background and your literature review. So usually the first paragraph is going to be what we know. Your second paragraph is going to be like what we don't know, and then maybe ending with a hypothesis or an objective or some sort of unique contribution. The methods, you're going to see like things about steps for what they did, the data sets that they're using, some analytic techniques, and results are just what the authors found. So I actually think the content here doesn't matter. This article that's being covered, we're going to go over in a later class. I just want you guys to get the idea of what articles are going to look like. So results are where you're going to find what the authors found, and they're going to be in the graphs, figures, tables. And the discussion is where you're going to find your study limitations, and this is important. You should pay attention to what limitations the studies have, and also where you're going to find the interpretations and conclusions of the authors, what they think their results mean. Okay, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I think I just, oh no, you guys still see the slides. Let me put it back in presentation mode. All right, so now discussion leaders. You guys are going to give the class about 15 to 20 minutes to read the article Sweet and Salty Nutritional Content and Analysis of Baby and Toddler Foods. This is going to be one of the easier articles we have to read. So if the methods don't make sense to you, that's okay. This is not a statistics class. I will very, very, very briefly go over some statistics next week for you guys. But that's not the point here. The point of this class is to teach you guys study design and to teach you guys how to identify bias. And as a class, so discussion leaders, you're going to give the class 15 to 20 minutes to read the article. And then as a class, you're going to complete the document that's called Classroom Lecture 1. I've also emailed it to the discussion leaders. And then you're going to complete the document as a class. And send me any questions you have about today's lecture or the paper that you just read. So you're completing the Classroom Lecture 1 document, and you're completing it using the Sweet and Salty Nutritional Content and Analysis of Baby and Toddler Foods. Okay, then if there's time, and I'm guessing there won't be, each student should complete the scholarly article form and submit it via Blackboard. If there's not time to do this in class, then it becomes your homework. And the last thing you need to do is you need to submit to me a first and second choice of topic. There's the link for Google Forms. If you already have a group and a topic, email it to me. Otherwise, you complete the form and I'm going to create the groups. And this is going to be your health condition for the rest of the summer that you will be studying. All right, final slide is just notes. So readings for tomorrow. So today I covered the chapter 1 in your book. Tomorrow I'm going to cover chapter 2. If you can't read both chapters, I'd say focus on chapter 2. And definitely read the Agurbo article. It's called Familial, Psychiatric, and Socioeconomic Risk Factors for Suicide in Young People. It should be in lesson 2 in Blackboard. And if you're, I would say read the article. If you have to prioritize something, read the articles over the chapters. Read chapter 2 over chapter 1. I mean, try to read it all, but I also understand that you're probably going to have to do the scholarly article form by yourself. Oh, the other thing really quickly, I guess, before I end this, is that I want to show you the topic list. So hold on while I switch screens. You should be seeing the picture of me again. All right, topic ideas. Okay, so these are the topics you guys are going to be able to pick from: diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, overweight and obesity, asthma, mental health and injury. We've got depression, suicide ideation, bullying, school violence, community violence, dating violence. And for infectious disease, you can do chlamydia, hep C virus, influenza. So sort of a miscellaneous category: alcohol use, cigarette smoking, physical activity, HIV testing, nutrition, contraception. So hopefully you guys are interested in one of these topics. If there's something not on here and you really, really want to study it, let me know and I'll see if we can make it work. All right, the next thing I want to show you is the scholarly article form that you as an individual needs to turn in. All right, so it's actually pretty simple, especially after you complete the class assignment. So you just need to put in AMA format the title, author, publication, and this is for the Elliott, the content analysis of baby food article. Purpose, what you think the purposes of the study. Something about study design, you guys you can put NA here for now because well, it's a content analysis. You could also put that, but we haven't got to the study design lectures, so I don't expect you to be able to fill out this column. Methods, just summarize how the authors conducted their study findings. So the results, summarize the results. And then I want you to write in a couple questions you have after reading this article. And lastly, write in how the article contributes to your understanding of the topic. You guys, this shouldn't take, I don't want you spending an hour on this. I want you spending like 15 to 20 minutes thinking through this. This assignment shouldn't take long. And for the class assignment, do I have the document open to show you? Yeah, let me switch to that just so you see what I'd like the discussion leaders what I would like you as a class to fill out. The discussion leaders will be in charge of writing and submitting it to me. All right, hold on. Sorry, I'm still switching. Class exercise. All right, this is the document you're completing as a class. Again, you're going to fill out title, author, study purpose. You can use this to then fill out your own lit review table. The health condition, health topic, or disease studied. It's a summary of the materials and methods, results from the study, conclusions from the study. What new questions do you have for further research? List at least 3. And what we can do to enhance health and wellness in children based on this article. And then lastly, I want you to brainstorm as a group and propose 2 actions for public health officials and policymakers to promote wellness in children. All right, guys, let me switch back. To the slides. All right, so with that, I think I've covered everything. If for some reason, like just watching this video is taking longer than expected, then just move the classroom activities over to Tuesday morning. So discussion leaders, you could start the class by giving people 15 to 20 minutes to review the article, you complete the document, and then you'll start watching the lecture for class 2. All right, goodbye.